Good afternoon, everybody. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Margaret House, Vice Chancellor here at Leeds Trinity. It's my pleasure to welcome you all here this afternoon, particularly those of you from the community and local business and things that have come along to listen to Peter. So it's an absolute pleasure to have Peter here with us this afternoon. I mean, I'm sure we all have very, very vivid memories of the 5th and 6th of July last year. I know I was out there on the streets on both Saturday and Sunday, and as your local southerner, was very proud to be part of what was going on up here in Yorkshire. So it was a fantastic event, and I think Peter's going to give us some of the inside track in terms of how they actually, from behind the scenes, how they actually managed to achieve all of this. So Peter is a commercial director for Welcome to Yorkshire, and was really the main man behind the scenes. So, you know, he might not have got all the glory in the press, but from what we know, it's Peter that made it all happen. And so we're really waiting to hear some of the gossip as well, of things that perhaps didn't go quite as well as it might have done. But certainly, as I say, someone that was out there on the streets, it looked perfectly seamless to me. And also, if there's anything in terms of the legacy, so 4 months on. What has it meant to Yorkshire 4 months after the event? So, Peter, thank you so much for coming along. Really grateful, and looking forward to hearing from you. Peter.
Thank you very much. Apologies to those of you that I missed the reception. My two friends in here have had a good chat for 3/4 of an hour. Having managed to get to France and bring the Tour de France here, my sense of direction might not be the best. But I thought I'd found the right hall, which we are, and I waited patiently. So apologies for that. Tour de France. 1 second. There we go. How many of you saw it live? Excellent. How many had seen the Tour de France before it came here? Yeah, it's a good idea about what it was. I saw like, thanks for the introduction. I'll try and give you a flavour very briefly how we actually managed it. How did we pull off a coup to bring the world's largest annual sporting event to Yorkshire? Then touch on the couple of weeks as a snapshot in the build-up to that fabulous weekend in Yorkshire. And then some of the other stuff around it, including the festival, and then some of the legacy stuff and some of the stuff that's about to happen in the coming years. And I presume there's time for questions at the end. Excellent. In November 10, Gary, who's Chief Exec, I'm the Commercial Director at Welcome to Yorkshire, Gary charmed his way into the French offices of the Amaury Sporting Organisation, ASO. ASO owned the Tour de France. It had its 101st running this year in Yorkshire. It started over 100 years ago. The Amaury Sporting Organisation, relevant to being here today, are a huge media organisation. And the editor then of one of their papers came up with the idea, why don't we organise a bike race around France to increase sales of the publication? That happened, and the rest is history. Now, a snapshot view of how we achieved it. Gary charmed his way into a meeting in November 10 with Jean-Etienne Amaury, the president of the firm, the family company. They didn't know who Gary was, where Yorkshire was. They're inundated with requests to bring the race to parts of France, parts outside of France. Gary came back and said it went well. We needed to do a presentation, and we would do it. I always thought that was the craziest idea I've ever heard. I can have selective hearing, and I ignored anything about a presentation, but as these things do, and you'll learn in life, sometimes things come back and bite you on the bum, as it did do in April 11, when we managed to get a slot in the diary of Christian Prudhomme and his top team to present Yorkshire. I'm a sports fan. I've played a lot of good level sport, and I knew about the Tour de France. I didn't know what a yellow jersey was, what a polka dot jersey was, how many people were in the team, why it came out of France. The internet, as you know, is a wonderful tool. That was my research library, along with Matt, who was our HR director at the time, and Alan, our IT man. And we fathomed out Google Maps, plotted 3 routes on a map, did a presentation, and off we went, Gary, Dee and I, to talk to the French. Presentation went well, namely because their IT failed. They were on a tight timetable, and it's always nervous when we do a lot of these presentations, and usually it's our fault, it's not somebody else's fault, but on this occasion the French system didn't work, which was a fabulous icebreaker. They were on a tight timetable, but they were embarrassed. The French are very genuine, hospitable people, so they were embarrassed that they'd invited 3 English people to come meet them and present. In the end, we probably stayed about 2.5 hours. We did the presentation, they gave us some homework, off we went. We thought that had gone well. We talked about the Olympic torch coming to Yorkshire in 2012, and they must come and see it, and they said yes, they'd love to come to Yorkshire. But they probably said that to every other destination country, you know, that went to pitch. It took us a year to then get a date in their diary, and they said they'd come for 24 hours. We sort of like said, well, Yorkshire hospitality is much better if you stay longer, and we managed to charm them by the end to stay short of 48 hours, just short of 2 days. We had one opportunity. That was the first time they'd ever been to Yorkshire. There was no room for error, no own goals, no mistakes, no questions they could ask that we didn't know the answers to. It had to be the performance of our lives. I put the itinerary together. We begged and borrowed from all our business friends, friends of family, partners, to acquire a number of things, including a helicopter, some very nice cars with drivers. I think one of the highlights of my Tour de France journey was asking someone we know rather well and thinking, how do you borrow a helicopter? Well, I'll just send him a text. Lawrence, can we borrow your helicopter? And he knows as well, and he came back and said, what do you want it for, Peter? And he said, oh, go on then. And I borrowed a helicopter. So the first time the French saw Yorkshire, we were in the midst of Chelsea Flower Show. On the Wednesday morning of that week in May, I met them at Eurostar. Eurostar are one of our partner friends. They gave me passes so that I could go the equivalent of airside, customs side, to meet them off the train. We were very conscious that we didn't want to lose them, but we didn't want them to meet anybody else. They might have had other meetings arranged. I surprised them by being on the platform, whisked them through Eurostar customs, into a car, and off we went to Battersea Heliport. Into Lawrence's helicopter, flew up to Yorkshire. They thought they were probably going to Leeds or Sheffield, somewhere like that. On the way up, I thought it was going rather well because it was a beautiful summer's day. It had been a nice spring, early summer. All the heather on the moors, it was brown. And they said, it looks a bit like Spain. I thought, that's positive. You know, they didn't know Yorkshire. we had to convince them. They also thought, I said, they were going to land in a city. And about 2/3 of the way up, I said, oh, we're not going to Leeds or Sheffield. We're going to top of the Yorkshire Dales, Coverdale, where Gary is a sheep farmer, a farmer. And in France, the ethos of the Tour de France is about bringing the people in the cities to rural France to showcase the great food, the wine, the cheese, the products. And our mission on this visit was to do the same. They knew Gary was a farmer, but they thought maybe he had lots of people to do things, he didn't get his hands dirty, which is obviously the opposite to that. As we approached Gary's farm, Gary had mowed a huge Y in one of the fields. The helicopter landed on the Y, Gary met us, we walked across. We had begged and borrowed Francis Atkins, who's one of our Michelin-starred chefs at the York Arms at Nidderdale. She did a nice late afternoon lunch, Yorkshire produce, Yorkshire beers, cheeses, everything, at the farm, tour of the farm. Part of our tactics was that we knew whatever we gave, you know, in any of these events, it gets passed around. So our tactic was, we had a nice printed brochure, with a nice DVD. We were happy for that to be passed to anybody, competitors the like. We sat in Gary's lounge, not a anonymous hotel room, conference room. And the information that was confidential, technical, or our USPs, we gave that verbally. Later that afternoon, whiz round the top of the dales, show them the roads, the walls, the sheep, the castles, give them a flavour. Back to Swinton Park Hotel. Helicopter later that afternoon around some of the proposed routes that we had. And then we landed at Harwood House outside Leeds. David, the Queen's cousin, and his wife Diane met us on the lawn. And that night in the state dining room we had a dinner for 40 people, which was the great and good, the captains of industry, the local authorities. It was Team Yorkshire. So the French would understand that this wasn't Gary and I or Welcome to Yorkshire or Leeds saying this is a great idea. We had everybody there, to the chief constables. Speeches were had, sat down for dinner, and Gary stood up and said, "Oh, apologies, Christian, we've got a late guest or a surprise guest." Christina runs the tour as a former journalist. The Tour de France is about telling stories, and they sell those stories around the world. Can we introduce Brian Robinson? Brian from Muirfield in Yorkshire, bless him, he's 84 now. He was the first Briton to complete the Tour de France, and he was the first Briton to win a stage of the Tour de France. I had managed to get a black and white photo. Some of you won't even know photographs used to be black and white, or that you printed them on film. I managed to get a black and white photo of Brian winning his stage in France. We'd framed it, Brian had signed it, out came Brian with his wife. Christian obviously knew who Brian was very moved. The only thing that we missed in those 2 days was I didn't expect Brian to speak in fluent French to Christian. And Brian came out and started talking in French, which was wonderful. And of course, in the 1950s, when you were a rider, if you didn't speak French, you struggled. And obviously, Brian spoke fluent French. We went back to the hotel that night. The following day, the tour of Leeds. We made a heroic decision that morning that we weren't going to go to a chain restaurant in Leeds because everything had been food miles, local food. We said to Leeds City Council, where we were meeting Keith and Tom, the leader and chief executive, council the restaurant, we're bringing 8 portions of Gravely's fish and chips. I think they're still doing a risk assessment on us bringing in fish and chips to the Mayor's Parlour. We told the French we knew the names of the fish that had been caught in Whitby that morning. 8 portions of fish and chips were eaten in the Mayor's Parlour in their paper on a plate, and there was nothing left. We walked out onto Millennium Square, where for what a rare weekend there was nothing happening there. And Christian said, "Oh, it's a nice big screen. If you know the square." I said, "Is it, yeah, it's always there." We'd done a short promotional film, a quick phone call downstairs for them to press play. To this day, Christian, the managing director of the tour, describes that as his Robert De Niro moment. Because the film, it was on brand, on target to the audience. The final clip, some of you might have seen it, is Mark Cavendish talking about Yorkshire. It's the home county of his mother. He's raced here many times. It's gorgeous, if not the best place in the world to visit. And he said, "Christian, I look forward to racing in Yorkshire, and I hope you can bring the Tour de France to Yorkshire." And one of those surreal, magical moments when everything goes quiet. And the big screen is, probably to the main road from here, but magical moment. We then got back in the cars, whizzed it across to York, private tour of the Minster, and then we walked through the city centre of York to meet the council and some nice council offices that are very historic to show them a bit of that heritage. Another inside tip about it was that the French, in terms of the race, it's very green. They hate they hate getting in the car if you can walk. So we walked. We then caught a train to London. Again, it would have been very easy to say goodbye in York, and off they went. And again, they could have gone AWOL in London and met whoever we knew. Took them all the way down to King's Cross, across to St Pancras. The same passes from Eurostar got us onto the platform. We put them on the Eurostar train to Paris, and mission accomplished. Was that successful? It felt successful at the time. We were no closer securing the Tour de France at that time. On the train back, Gary and I developed a rather more positive mentality that we were race ready, and we were available at short notice. On the training back, they were giving us more homework to do, and Christian said that Yorkshire was sexy, Yorkshire was gorgeous, so we'd achieved that part of the mission. He said we had all the ingredients, we just needed to learn to cook together, and he asked us not to bid for a particular year, because at that point in time we'd said we thought, or I'd looked on the internet and worked out, we thought 2016 was the next available slot. So we immediately said, yes, we can drop the year, we're available. They departed. I'll then rattle through the next bits. We went off, they invited us to go to Liège in July 11 to see an out of France start. We did that, that was very good. They gave us some more homework. We went back the following July to see them. Sorry, that was July 12. We thought we were getting closer, but the competition was getting hotter. Florence, Berlin, Barcelona, Edinburgh, Venice, and a few others were there. And you never knew, because there's no bid book. It's not like you're bidding for a World Cup or a Commonwealth Games. But when we went back in July, we were very conscious that we were getting to know them very well. And as an aside, a winning part of this was about relationships. You can send loads of emails, texts, you can send glossy things, but actually face-to-face, picking up the phone, talking to people. So much so that many of the French people, our friends over there, are actually friends for life now. You know, and the success of this was key relationships. They asked for something, we'd anticipated the question, we knew the answer. We didn't want to be in a position whereby, and you know, and it happens, people ask you something, I'll get back to you, I'll find out. You know, we had to be positive, just to give that, that enthusiasm that we could do it. July 12, the race, we did that in Liège. We went back out for the end of the tour at the Champs-Élysées in Paris. They asked us to come back later that week, and we did, with more plans. I think by about September we'd got a draft contract, September 12, but it was literally a blank contract that they probably sent to 10 or 20 people a year. We went out in October 12 for the team presentation when they announced the tour the following year. It was hilarious in Leeds that the BBC were ringing us, harassing us, saying it's going to happen, you're going out. BBC were promising to take out satellite trucks, the world's media, and we're going, we haven't signed a contract, we don't know anything, and they were trying to tell us, and we were thinking they knew something, they were thinking we knew something, and I genuinely said, and nothing was signed that October. They were announcing the 100th running of the tour. That was their news story, not the distraction of another event. That November 12, the 26th, 27th of November, we went out to do the final contract changes, negotiations. November the 27th in Paris, we signed a contract. Was that a euphoric moment? It was a milestone, but we couldn't tell anybody. We were also very nervous that they could have, and this is not being disingenuous to them, but when you're bidding for something you don't know, they could have done the same process with 3 or 4 other cities. You know, money could have been transferred to bank accounts as deposits. We came back, we pushed them for a date in January. We said we have to book acts, launch the tour, it's coming. We got a date out of them January the 17th, 2013, so that was a positive sign. But it wasn't till the evening, Thursday the 13th of December 2013, that Christian rang Edinburgh, Barcelona, Florence, Berlin to say thank you very much, we'd love the tour to come to you in a future year, but this year it's not you. On Friday morning, till the press release went from ASO in Paris, again, was it happening, was it really happening? They pressed the button at 10 o'clock on that Friday morning, then it was real, it was happening. The global media attention was suddenly focused on Holbeck, Leeds. Anybody who knows where our office is in Holbeck, it's It's a heritage foundry site. Alf, the car park attendant, is 75. He's used to dealing with cars, people parking where they shouldn't park, but when 6 to 10 satellite trucks turn up, no, you can't, you'll have to park on those flags, Alf. I know they're protected, but it'll be all right. And then you've got the office full of media going crazy. So much so that on Saturday, the 15th of December, 2012, the Daily Telegraph said a coup had taken place in Yorkshire that day. You know, literally two fat blokes then from Leeds and Yorkshire had literally pinched the Tour de France from under the noses of international competition. We'd done it in 6 months. We were outsiders. We never knew. I don't think we were ever favourites, if there was a favourite. We won it on pride, passion, belief, dedication, honesty, believed that this was our moment. Why did we bid for it? Gary came up with the inspiration. You know, Manchester had the Commonwealth Games, failed the Olympics, but look at Manchester, they'd done the Commonwealth Games. We, you know, by nature of how you bid for things, Yorkshire can never host the Commonwealth Games, will never host the World Cup, Champions League, football, or the Olympics. But we have got the landscape, the people, the topography, the food, the produce, the magic, the wow factor in Yorkshire that was a perfect mix to host the world's largest annual sporting event. January 13 was 18 months to go. We announced it that morning, 6 o'clock on January the 17th. We were in Paris, Radio Leeds going live from a Parisian cafe. We went to the British Embassy with 200 European media. The ambassador, ourselves and ASO, launched it there. We nipped on a bus, as you do, to Charles de Gaulle Airport. Jet2.com, Great Yorkshire airline, put on their Yorkshire plane, branded Yorkshire. They had their media crew on that they used for filming. The captain was a cyclist. Flew to Leeds Bradford Airport. The UK media were on the apron at Leeds Bradford. Police escort to Leeds Town Hall, 4:30 on that Thursday afternoon. Leeds Town Hall, 250 media in the media briefing room for the UK launch. That evening, 2,500 people stood in the snow as the official gala dinner, La Nuit de Tour, to announce the Tour de France coming to Yorkshire took place with cameras everywhere. That night, 350 people sat down and listened to Gary and Christian announce, and Nick Clegg, that the Tour de France was coming to Yorkshire. And that was the start of a whirlwind of activity that was a once-in-a-lifetime experience. We said it was a transformational moment, and I'll come back to that later. I think it went beyond that. But just to give you just to remind you of what happened earlier this year. If I get this right.
And see the light, your time has come. You and me, a boy and girl. This day is ours.
brings back memories. 5 o'clock on Saturday the 5th of July, it was raining in Leeds. The forecast that week had gradually got better. 6 o'clock that morning, Radio Leeds, the roads are quiet. We always knew, or we said, or we believed. We thought about 1 million, 1.5 million per stage. Gary and I were very confident in that. Many people doubted us, or where are these people coming from? We were organising an event for 3 to 4 million people to come and watch. Unlike the Olympics, you have a ticket, you've got a seat in a stadium, swimming pool or a basketball arena. The Tour de France is mobile. It covered 360, 380 kilometres of Yorkshire. We didn't know where you lived. We didn't know what time you were coming. We didn't know how you were coming or where you were going. So that's quite a unique challenge. Those of you who are on media or marketing, we had a very effective PR marketing plan, comms communications plan. Briefly, it was staged 3 or 4 months out on the website, on all the media that went out. The question we were asked, week in, week out for the last 2 years was, where's the best place to watch it? I'm going to go to Leeds, and I'm going to go to Harrogate, or I'm going to go here. I said, no, you can't do that. Choose your spot, and you stay there for the day. We had complex transport infrastructure with the trains, the buses, the car parks were all coordinated. The messages going out 3 months before were, think about what you're going to do. 2 months before that, it was, where are you going to sleep on the Friday night? So think about where you're going to sleep, and then you're ready. Where you're going to be on the Saturday night, where you're going to be on the Sunday. A month out or 2 months out, have you booked your accommodation? Have you done that? And then I think it was about 6 weeks to go. The website, Le Tour Yorkshire, which was the home of the Tour de France in the UK, interactive mapping. It had all the road closures on, the temporary road closures. It told you which car parks, which campsites were full. Very, very detailed information. And it worked. Millions of people, millions of page views happened, that people looked at it and worked out what to do. There were things we could have done better in hindsight, but there's no dress rehearsal. That we managed to create a 5-hour queue for Leeds railway station on the Saturday after the race, but everyone was having a good time and there was no complaints. We had 10,000 people queuing on Saturday night to get back on a train at Harrogate, but everyone had had a fabulous, fabulous day. We did nearly 400 workshops between March 13 and July this year. And that inspired the communities, the businesses, the people of Yorkshire to get behind it. Why was the knitted bunting? Because we persuaded people. Why were yellow bikes everywhere? Because we told people the best way to market it. You couldn't. It's like the Olympics. You can't abuse the brand. You can't use that. You can use the colour yellow. You can be creative. The pubs on the route, the garden centres off the route. It was a huge opportunity to make money, as hundreds and hundreds of thousands of businesses did. We delivered the race the whole weekend. That week, about 20,000 people. 10,000 of those were volunteers, tour makers. It was a huge, huge super class team, from the local authorities to the highways to the emergency blue light services, mountain rescue, the army. The things that you learn about what happens behind the scenes, a barrier falls over or somebody gets injured, how that's dealt with, and it's not a crisis, and the race is able to continue. We had 2,000 toilets across the route. We had 30,000 cones. We broke the record in Cragvale for the longest bunting, 10 kilometres. That's pretty serious dedication. There was 2,500 journalists who were in Yorkshire for about 6 to 7 days following the tour. People that you dream of, to get destination coverage that you would never expect to be here. From a media perspective, and not including the broadcast of the race, we had £330 million of media coverage. Again, it was an advertising marketing campaign that you could never afford, or you'd never be able to price up. Broadcast live, 5 hours on both days to 190 countries. We wrote the media Bible for the day. If you watched it on TV or you watch the Tour de France, they don't watch the riders the whole race. You'd be bored to death watching men in Lycra on a bike for 5 hours. They cut from the race, they reduce it to the top quarter of the screen. And then, you know, they talked about Bolton Abbey, they talked about the Yorkshire Dales, they talked about Hull, they talked about all these destinations. And we'd given that script to the French director of TV, who then controlled the output around the world. That script was then translated into whatever language. And every day, so the Saturday, Sunday, Monday, there was then an hour's highlight package that went to another 160 countries. Yorkshire was firmly put on the map. We raised the bar for the French, for Bless Them Utrecht next year. The French, we promised them the grandest ever Grand Depart in terms of a whole host of activities. At the end of it, whether it was Bernard Hinault or Christian Prudhomme, it went beyond their wildest dreams. We took over the Leeds Arena on the Thursday night for the team presentation. Team presentation previously, they'd never had an opening ceremony. Again, we promised we'd do that differently. We had 12,000 passionate people in that arena that night. I walked out of the hotel on Thursday night to walk up to the arena, and that night, that moment, Leeds was alive, the sun was shining, everybody was walking in the same direction. The hearts, souls and minds of the community, of everybody in Leeds was going one way. This was going to be a great event. Gary and I can speak passionately about Yorkshire, but that night in the arena there was two amazing wins. The first team came on, Team Astana, which bizarrely, if you go back to Liège in 2011, the first time Gary and I turned up in France, the French booked us into a chateau in Liège. We walked into this rustic chateau. The man or lady behind the reception wasn't there. We saw Team Astana in the car park. I thought, 2 coaches, 10 cars, hive of industry. I borrowed, I'm just choosing my words now in front of the camera, I borrowed the rooming list for Team Astana. I'm going, there was 50 people staying with that team that night. So you multiply that by 22 teams, you're thinking, that's quite amazing. Pure fate that Team Astana were the first team on that night in Leeds. Team Astana to Team Sky, the 22nd team on that night, got the same applause. Passionate, standing ovations, for want of a better word. The French had never seen anything like that. You know, Gary and I and the rest of us can be passionate, but when you've got 12,000 independent people, that was a transformational moment. Even better than that was that the riders hate the team presentation. You know, they're focused, they're about to ride 3,500 kilometres, they want to be in a hotel room having a massage, fueling, relaxing. They loved it. It was short, snappy, so much so that Sebastian and the presenter had to come, Marcel, you've got to go. And you know, and the rest of his team didn't follow. The riders were taking pictures. There was, you know, it was like, wow. So that was a wonderful occasion. But it was a bike race, obviously, but it was more than a bike race. We promised the French that we would create the first arts festival. You know, one of our roles, we wanted to extend it. It was a weekend in July. We wanted to make it something much bigger. The Yorkshire Festival, which was the 100-day arts festival, started on the 27th of March, finished that weekend in July. And that took the Tour de France, the arts festival, to the whole of Yorkshire. So again, it mobilised everyone. And I'll just show you this film before I tell you what it did. Sorry. quite amazing all that happened because we went and bid for a bike race. Inspired people, enthused people, quite magical. The festival briefly was 100 days of culture, and it's high-end, highbrow to local grassroots inspired activity. 47 headline projects, commissions, over 500 fringe events. 100 days of events were seen by just over 750,000 people. 1,400 performances, generated about in the region of about £10 million to the Yorkshire economy. All this meant by July the 7th, and there's a whole other story of how we got the riders back to France, but we haven't got time for that today, that nobody was left across the world and across Europe as to where Yorkshire was. That was the goal. If you want to put your destination Yorkshire PLC on the map, then you bring the Tour de France to your home. Post the Tour de France, lots of positive stories, lots of potential legacy activity. Just after the race had left, there was an independent survey that said a quarter of the UK population wanted to visit Yorkshire. We were disappointed it was only 25%. A third of the UK had changed their opinion of Yorkshire. 3/4 of the population of Yorkshire want us to bid for even bigger events. Not quite sure how we top. Again, what are you going to do next? Well, how do you beat having the world's largest annual sporting event? Eurosport, who cover the event, had a 60% increase in their viewing figures for when it was here. And this was one of the anecdotal or humbling reactions was that Gary and I were in France a number of times post the Yorkshire Grand Depart doing various marketing PR things, and to walk down a finish line or the start line and people to be shouting Yorkshire, the French to be shouting Yorkshire, Yorkshire, Yorkshire. Anticlimax in Le Touquet on Tuesday the 8th of July. It was overcast, it was damp. And the French said, where are the Yorkshire crowds? Where is the Yorkshire sunshine? Oh, back in France. Not to be repeated. Generally, businesses, the tourism industry, shops, pubs, garden centres, tremendous uplift in business, very, very positive. Some huge social changes, more people say they're riding bikes, more people doing exercise or sport. Very much a can-do attitude in terms of the whole team, the local authorities of Yorkshire, the delivery people, new skills, new partnerships, new methods of working together. New cycle developments, the Leeds-Bradford cycle highway. Sheffield has got plans for a traffic-free cycle route. York is developing more cycle initiatives as a very cycle-friendly city. One of the other things we achieved, and in terms of international marketing, if you live in France, you live in Australia, or you're an American, Canadian, you know the UK, you know London, you know Scotland, or you know Edinburgh. Yorkshire internationally is now very much what we'd call the third dot in the UK. So now people think London, Yorkshire, Scotland. So we're very much claiming that ground, which is good for tourism businesses. The results of a huge economic impact study will be announced in Leeds on the 4th of December. I think that's going to be good news, going to produce a great dividend for Yorkshire in terms of the amount of money that's been spent this summer. We estimated 3 million visits, spectators, and in the region of £100 million will have been spent, plus some inward investments in the pipeline. Anybody who saw the Sports Personality of the Year last December at the Leeds Arena, that came to Leeds because we got the Tour de France. That's the power of it. How did we do it? I've given you a little insight, given you tips for going forward. One of our how we do things is we aim to be awesome, think big. Nice PR and marketing words, but if you turn up every day and whatever you do and think, well, I'll do this and do that, we need to push boundaries. You need to have that big idea. We had some of the Welcome to Yorkshire magical sparkle, pixie dust, don't try and do too many things, but aim to be awesome. Nobody ever tells you that you're awesome, but you might get close. And as a team, you can rub off on each other. Across the whole journey from when Gary had the great idea, it's a great idea now, I believe him. What did we do? We were passionate, we had pride in what we wanted, in the power of Yorkshire. We believed, we had belief, we weren't going to, it was our destiny. People said, what were your greatest fears? And I think I said to someone this week, actually, there were many highs and lows on that journey, but actually for me and for Gary, the fear of actually not winning, that was worse than any anticlimax that didn't happen after this July. If in October, November 12 we hadn't been successful, that would have been a different story. But we tried our best to make sure no stone was uncovered. And as I said earlier, relationships. Some of our very, very best friends are French men and ladies, absolute stars. Why do we bid for the Tour de France? Because it showcases your destination. My knowledge of France 3.5 years ago was Paris, the Pyrenees, Belize, Perpignan. The places I've seen in France, because the Tour de France has been there, or I've seen the film, the TV coverage, the French wines, the French food, the French people, in places that may not be on the tourist scene, but there are some fabulous places in France. We've recreated and shown that for Yorkshire. In January, to conclude of this year, Lonely Planet named Yorkshire as one of the top 3 destinations in the world. AOL, the American travel website, said Yorkshire was in the top 10 of the world's best holiday destinations. TripAdvisor said outside London, Yorkshire was the place to go. Now, if you work for a small organisation called Welcome to Yorkshire, a small team, dedicated, perfectly formed, whose aim and aspiration is to put Yorkshire on the map, persuade more people to visit Yorkshire, and ultimately people to spend money in Yorkshire. That wasn't a bad start to the year. We had a fair to cracking summer. It's the start of an adventure, not the end of an adventure. And the last anecdote of many, when we were bidding and we got close to signing the contract, the Mayor of Florence called us, he wrote to us as a bidding city. He said Leeds was a wonderful place, maybe similar to Florence. Yeah. Would we mind stepping aside to let Florence have it this year? We complimented Florence on the destination as a wonderful Italian, and we'd love to support him in a future year. When it got round to announcing when the decision was going to be made, or the public announcement of who had won, one of the factors they had to establish was, were there going to be elections in Italy? Because if there were elections in Italy, the Mayor of Florence was potentially the next Prime Minister of Italy. And if you're a French international sporting event, you don't have many, you want lots of friends. So they had to check when those elections were happening. Fortunately for us, they happened post, I think it was the spring of January 13 that year. Who's the Prime Minister of Italy now? The Mayor of Florence. Hey, one of our best friends. Thank you very much.